All of the books I read in 2024, Golden Globe edition. It's currently Christmas Eve and no one will be home for the next hours, so I'm utilizing the living room. Hi, my name is Amanda Fagan. I read 26 books this year. It was my New Year's resolution to read 25, so I did one over that. Last year my resolution was to read 10 books because I hadn't been reading much as I used to, and I read 15 books in 2023, 26 in 2024, and next year I'm gonna read more. We are going to do something different. I talked about a lot of these books over the summer, so if you want to see a detailed review of certain books that I'm going to gloss over because I already did a detailed review of them, you can check out my summer, all of the books I read this summer 2024. But I will be touching on every book, giving them a rating, but I will only talk in detail about the books that I have not said anything about yet on this channel. And also, I might be changing my rating of a few of the books because I've had time to sit and think about it, and maybe I've changed my mind about a few things and have put things into perspective. I have 10 awards that I'm going to be giving out from this envelope that were inspired by the Golden Globe Awards for movies and television series, but we're applying it to books. 1 second. No one's outside. I'm just paranoid. Okay, but before I give out those awards, which I've put a lot of thought into, I will go through every single book that I read in like 5 seconds each, unless I haven't talked about it. Then I'll spend a little bit more time talking about it. I want to give every book its fair chance because, honestly, I did not read one bad book this year. Okay. There's only one book I read this year that I did not like at all, and that was Alice in Wonderland. Don't come at me. I've had this conversation with so many people this year. I read it in one day, too, and I just don't like nonsensical. That's like my least favorite genre ever. I thought it was romance. It's not. Nonsensical is my least favorite genre. I can handle some romance. I can't handle nonsensical. It drives me mad. That's the only book I didn't like that I read this year. All the other books I enjoyed, whether I rated them 3 stars to 5 stars. If I rated a book above that, I enjoyed it. I'm trying to be fair because some of these are classic books and some of these are debut books, and it's kind of hard to like rate them, but I will do my best. I did genuinely enjoy all of these books. There was an aspect of the book that I really loved, no matter what, of every single one of these books. So the first book that I read this year was The Murder of Mr. Wickham, which I have not talked about yet on my channel. It is the first of the Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney murder mystery series by Claudia Gray. Basically, this series is after all of Jane Austen's novels, and each book focuses on a different novel, like the characters from it, after the fact, and a murder happens. And these two characters who are next generation, Mr. Jonathan Darcy, so not the Mr. Darcy everyone knows, that it's his son, and Miss Tilney, who is Catherine Morland and Henry Tilney's daughter. These next generation Jane Austen characters are solving murder mysteries. Mr. Wickham gets murdered, he shows up uninvited, he gets murdered, they have to figure out who did it. I couldn't guess who it was, I'm gonna be honest. I literally had no idea who it was, and it was really good. And I read this pretty quickly. You should not read this book if you have not read all of Jane Austen's novels, I will say that. It expects you to know every single character from every single novel. It's basically Jane Austen murder mystery fan fiction, but written really well, historically accurate, good murder mystery. The characters in this are amazing, the original characters. I'm very impressed. I'm gonna give this one I have to be fair, a 4.5 stars out of 5. The next book that I read was Alice in Wonderland. I read it in one day because I had to for my directing class. It is a really good example of a certain type of story structure that we were studying. I will admit that it is a well-written book. I just really found out that I don't like nonsensical. I didn't like Alice in Wonderland because it was nonsensical for no reason. I love books where there's a hidden meaning in it, but I think Alice in Wonderland, there was no meaning to the craziness. It was just disturbing. And there's certain chapters in there that are not included in adaptations, and I think that's good because the mom with the baby pig that sneezes, and it's, ooh, I hate that chapter. Like the baby turns into a pig and it starts sneezing pepper and it's like really disturbing. That's not even my least favorite chapter. My least favorite chapter is the mock turtle. I hate that chapter so much. The mock turtle is this ugly like turtle creature. It's scared of dying and it's just like crying and wailing the whole time and talking about death, and it's like thrown in right in the climax. Like Alice is about to go to the Queen of Hearts and then she takes a detour, meets the mock turtle, and then goes on with her journey, and it was just so unnecessary. The only character that I really liked from Alice in Wonderland was the Mad Hatter. Maybe the Cheshire Cat. I thought those two characters were pretty solid. I really liked the Mad Hatter though. He was my favorite character. Alice in Wonderland though, overall, I'm gonna give it a 2 stars out of 5. I'm sorry if you like Alice in Wonderland. I don't like it. I'm sorry. I think it's very interesting, but it's too disturbing for me. The third book of the year I read was Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I thought it was a really cute read. I watched the adaptation afterwards, and I really loved the adaptation. I didn't realize it wasn't a novel with a driving story. It's more so a bunch of short stories about these little old ladies who live in this village, and I think it's really wholesome and cute. But I'm more of a novel-driven person. I thought the stories were really sweet. I thought they talked about a lot of mundane but important things. I thought it was very comedic at times. It is well written. I just felt like it was a little slow at times. This is coming from a classic girly. I've read like probably about 40 classics. I think it's best read in bite sizes. I think you'll enjoy it more that way if you like read a chapter every once in a while. I do think it's a good read. I do think it's worth reading, worth checking out. 3.5 stars. So these next books I'm not going to talk about in depth because I reviewed all of these in detail in my summer video. I'm going to just re-rank them because my opinion has changed a little bit, but I'm not going to really talk in depth about them. I will say like a few things. Okay. The Haunting of Hill House was the 4th book I read. Incredible. My first true horror read. This is Stephen King's favorite book. It's very psychological, which I was not expecting from Stephen King, but I really love psychological because it's all about the mind and not necessarily blood and gore and demons, and I hate that kind of stuff. You know, I can deal with blood, but gore and demons are a no-go for me. Great characters. I'm gonna give this a 5 out of 5. This was a really good book. Really good book. Colin Dexter, Last Bus to Woodstock. Really enjoyed it. I don't like how certain women are described in the book, I'll just say that. But it's a really well-written mystery. You can't guess what it is. It is just such great writing if you can look past the little comments here and there. It does touch on really dark topics though. If We Were Villains, oh my gosh, this book. As a theater major, this book was mind-twisting psychologically. Just the way they talk about this group of college kids studying theater and how they don't know who they can trust, and all these allegories and metaphors to Shakespeare are done so well. There's foreshadowing. You don't know, are these people playing a role? Are they actually friends? Are they more than friends? This is a mystery book. It's dark academia. Even though there are some like dark themes and there's some twisted characters, I think that this book is just written so well. 5 out of 5 stars. The Late Mrs. Willoughby, the second of the Claudia Gray series. Honestly, I thought it was really good, but I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 stars because I felt like this was the easiest murder for me to guess. But I will say it might be because I'm a huge murder mystery girl. It's more based on Sense and Sensibility, and I love what they did with Eleanor and Marianne. I love the sisters so much. 4 out of 5 stars. The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Oh my gosh, I read this book in 7th grade. It was the first book that I read that made me cry, and I had to reread it. I hadn't read it in like 8 years. I had to find out why this book made me cry, and oh my gosh. If you like found family, please read this book. I am such a found family girly. I love found family. It's my favorite trope of all time. Literally no trope comes close to found family in my heart, in my brain, in my soul. This is a book about brothers by blood and not by blood. And I cried both times reading it. It's so good. It's so good. Oh my gosh, please read it. 5 out of 5 stars. Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. This book was recommended to me by my pen pal. This is a really good book. Daphne du Maurier is known for Rebecca. No one talks about Jamaica Inn. Everyone talks about Rebecca. This is a really good one by her that's not as popular. Why is it not? Why is it not? It is a mystery. There's a little bit of a love plot in there, but it doesn't overwhelm the main story. There's a plot twist in it that just no adaptation can get right. It's such a good plot twist that you don't see, and I literally forgot that time was passing while I was reading this book. I started it with an ear infection and still was enjoying it even though I was in pain from an ear infection. 5 out of 5 stars. The Secrets of Heartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden. I will say, going into this, I did not know that this was a romance book, which is my fault because I'm just not a huge romance person. Katie Lumsden does a really good job staying true to the time period. She uses eloquent language. She really is good at building this world. This book was really well written. I'm just not the hugest fan of the Victorian romance, but that's more so a personal preference. I loved the found family aspects of this book so much. I loved Lewis. I loved the main character's relationship to Lewis, the little boy of the house, but I just wasn't a big fan of like the romance in the book, but I thought that it was well written. 3.5 stars. Ready Player One. Really, really, really solid book. This was my first blind date with a book that I read this year, and it was something that I probably never would have grabbed off the shelf if I hadn't been given this as a blind date with a book. This was definitely a really good read. I think that this was a really solid book. I'm gonna give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really good book. The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I think I might be biased when I give this the highest ranking of the series. It's about my favorite books. This one's more so based on Northanger Abbey and Pride and Prejudice, which are my favorite Jane Austen books. And seeing Mr. Darcy and Henry Tilney interact was everything I thought it would be. Am I biased for saying it's 5 out of 5 when I think that the first book of the series had the hardest mystery to guess? Maybe, but I just really like it, and I just like read it so quickly. I read it faster than any other book in the series, but it could be just because all of my favorite characters were in this, and it's basically a fan fiction about my 2 Jane Austen books with murder. So can you blame me? 5 out of 5 stars. Next, speaking of which, is Northanger Abbey. I love this book so much, and I'm probably gonna read it again next year because I love this book. Is it the best written Jane Austen book? No, but it is the only Gothic Jane Austen book. It's very comedic. I've talked about this book in depth in another video, so I won't go into it because I could talk about this book forever and why it's underestimated, it's underrated, it's misunderstood, and people will hate on the main character because they don't understand the point of the book. When you go into the world for the first time as like a 17-year-old girl, you don't understand how like some people are going to wrong you and some people don't have the best intention in mind. This is still my second favorite, so 5 out of 5. Next is Anxious People. Really funny book. Love the characters, made me laugh, made me cry a lot. It was a great recommendation from my cousin, 5 out of 5. Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. My second blind date with a book of the year, and it was genuinely probably my favorite book for a hot minute there of the year. Brilliant sci-fi fantasy book, incredible main character, and it made me want to read the rest of the series. Brandon Sanderson is an amazing author. 5 out of 5 stars. Picnic at Hanging Rock, which was another recommendation from my pen pal. Incredible classic book that I would have never discovered if I had not talked to her. It takes place in Australia in the 1800s, and it's about these 3 girls and their teacher that go missing, and it's really eerie and really well written, and you kind of like the whole time you don't really know if you can trust anybody. It's giving Lord of the Flies, but with girls at a preppy school in like Victorian times. It's really, really good. 5 out of 5 stars. Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, the second in the Skyward series, and it's really good. This one, instead of more action-based, it is more political-based, and I typically am not the hugest fan of sci-fi political books, but this really hit the nail on the head with an alien political system. Really, really cool, really well done. Read this in like 2 or 3 days, which is crazy because it's one of the longest books I read this year. I'm gonna say 5 out of 5 stars. This is actually 3 books in one. I read 2 of the 3 because 2 of them take place before the 3rd book in the trilogy, and the 3rd book in the trilogy gave me a reading slump and I actually did not like it. I'm sorry, Brandon Sanderson. I couldn't get through it. I'm really sorry. It wasn't bad, but it just wasn't as good as the first 2. So I only read the first 2 books, which were Sunreach and Read On, about her, and they were both really solid. I'd have to say that both of them are 4 out of 4 stars, and really good side stories that were both wholesome but very high risk. Really good, and you should definitely read them if you want to read the Skyward series. I, Robot by Asimov. I'm so sorry if I pronounced it wrong. I'd heard a lot about this book. I went to LA with my friend. We were so obsessed with Detroit Become Human. We saw this book at Barnes & Noble and we thought, haha, funny, let's read it, because this is a really, really renowned book. And people say if you like Detroit Become Human, you gotta watch or read I, Robot. I have not watched it, but reading the book, it was very interesting. It was a novel, but it was more like short stories. They were connected, but they were separate stories, but like a common thread that tied them all together. It was very interesting, and it dealt with a lot of ethical dilemmas too, which was very fascinating, and I was not expecting. I thought it was going to be more of like an action book, but it was more of a thought-provoking book. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Alice Hoffman, A World That We Knew, which is another blind date with a book I did this year, and the last one that I've done this year. I just didn't have enough time to read through any other ones because I had so many other books that I wanted to read this year. If you want me to do more next year, let me know, and I will. I did a video on this if you want to hear more about it, but it made me tear up a lot, and I love historical fiction. It's hard to read World War II historical fiction though, because it's just such a heartbreaking time. I mean, all of wars are, but that one especially is always hard for me, but I thought it was really beautifully well written and handled the subjects very well. So I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 stars, just because I felt like there was like this one plot that I felt like I wasn't satisfied with all the way. Next is Frankenstein, the 1818 text. This is my favorite book, tied with Pride and Prejudice, maybe second to Pride and Prejudice. I never read the 1818 text until this year. I read the normal Frankenstein twice, and then I read this one for the first time, the 1818 version this year. Oh my gosh. I could talk about this forever. It's so good. Literally, I will rant to you positively about this book so much. It's just such a good story, and I could talk about it forever. Check out my Halloween book video so you can hear me ramble. I can't get started because I will get carried away. You don't want to hear me ramble about Mary Shelley. It's a problem. 5 out of 5 stars. Genuinely one of my favorite books of all time. Probably my favorite book of all time, tied with Pride and Prejudice. Dracula by Bram Stoker. I was a little scared to read this book because most of my friends that had read it either said it was really great or really bad. Like, some people warned me not to read this book. It was so interesting. I know. It's not the original vampire story. I know that. Trust me. I know Carmilla. But I felt like this is the book that establishes a lot of the tropes. And it is so good. It is really good. I genuinely was really surprised because I was halfway through and I'm like, this is so freaking good. How do people not like this? Am I missing something? Is something going to happen that I don't like? And no. It was good till the end. I will say I think the first half was a lot faster paced. I still think like the end was also really fast paced, but there was like a chunk towards the end that was a little bit slower, but I felt like for the most part, I was soaring through this. It was really good. I would just sit in the library dressed like a vampire every day to get into character. It was solid. It's written in journal entries, diary entries. And Dracula, he doesn't even tell you his point of view at all. It's all through the people that encounter him, and it's so fascinating. I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5 stars. Next is Pride and Prejudice, which I thought I'd finish during the summer. I only had a few chapters left, and I didn't finish it till November. So we're not going to talk about that. But I could talk about this book forever because it is my favorite book, so I won't. And just say 5 out of 5 stars. As you can tell, I annotated this. I read it for the 3rd time and annotated it. That's why it took me so long to read it. It's color-coded by Aristotle's The Poetics, because I'm a little weird like that. So I got like the plot points and the themes and like, yeah. I read Charles Dickens, finally. I had not read any Charles Dickens as a classic book girly. Isn't that crazy? I was kind of intimidated. I was blown away by how complex the writing was for such a short story. Like the vocabulary, the images that Dickens draws, the feelings he invokes. It's incredible. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't because I was reading this out loud to my parents because we were going to see A Christmas Carol, a play live. And so I'm like, hey, I should read the book on the drive up because it was like a trip we were going to have to make. So I read it on the way up and back. And yeah, I controlled myself. And like, I've seen this story 100 times, yet I'd never read it before. And I learned so much from reading it. So I think you should really read this book. It was really moving, and it reminds you like what Christmas is really all about. It's beautiful, and it makes sense why it's like probably the most adapted Christmas book of all time. 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read this year, my 26th book, is The Crown of Orondane by Joshua Tribble, and this is the illustrated version by Sarah Snow, the illustration on the top, and then there's some throughout the book. This is written by a friend of mine that I actually met at college. He's a film major, and he also took some writing workshop classes with me. He's a really good writer, and he's currently reading the first draft of my novel. And I said, you know what, if you're going to read the first draft of my novel over Christmas break, I got to read your novel. And he's writing a series for kids. This is a kids fantasy series, but it's really inspired by like Narnia and Tolkien's works. He wanted to do that kind of realm of fantasy because that's what he really enjoyed growing up. And I think this book really stays true to that. I'm not the hugest fantasy fan. I told him going into it, fantasy is one of my least favorite genres, but I did like Tolkien as a kid. So I did tell him like, I'm going into this, but I thought he did a really good job with the world building, the characters. There's really good themes and morals in this book. I think the characters are so fascinating. Like some of the stuff he comes up with, I'm like, how did you come up with that species? That is genius and really cool. I think if I was a kid, I would really like this book. Also, Sarah Snow used to be my roommate. We are still friends, really good friends. And so she drew this. She's really talented. She drew like a bunch of pictures throughout the book. And I thought this was really cool getting the illustrated version and seeing her work, because I remember she used to doodle, like she would draw sketches for this book when we were roommates. So that's so crazy. And here's a picture of them in the back. This is Josh and this is Sarah, and they're really good people. I'm going to give this a 4.5 stars out of 5, but only because I've seen Josh's writing now, and I know he's like improved so much as a writer, and this is still really well written. It's so well written. Like, I think for kids, like this is like really perfect for a kids series. Say 3rd to like 8th grade range, but like I enjoyed it as an adult. It's time for the awards. And now, the Golden Globe for the best drama. Drum roll, please. The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This book is one of my favorite books I read this year. Incredible found family, incredible characters, incredibly written, a classic book for everyone. But the runner-up was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, just because I felt like the drama of theater is very well portrayed in that book. Now, the best comedy of 2024 is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Now, I told myself I wasn't going to give any awards to my favorite books, but I just feel like none can compare to how funny Pride and Prejudice is. And I feel like people don't realize how funny Pride and Prejudice is until you're sitting with your dad watching the 1995 BBC version and he's cracking up and you're like, Dad, you're laughing at Jane Austen? Because Jane Austen's funny, guys. And Pride and Prejudice is hilarious. Probably one of her funniest books. All of her books are funny. Jane Austen is so witty. And I love Pride and Prejudice, and reading it a 3rd time just made me remember how funny Jane Austen is. The runner-up and honorable mention is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, because that was a funny book. I do think Jane Austen is funnier. She's Jane Austen, okay? She's Jane Austen. It's hard to compare. But I felt like Anxious People had a lot of silliness in it, but it was also really heartwarming, and it made me laugh and cry a lot, so I wanted to mention it. The best book without an adaptation, and surprisingly, majority of the books I read had adaptations, which I thought was crazy. Not all of them were good, but this is one that did not have an adaptation, and I thought deserves one, is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, because that would be a really cool space fantasy adaptation, and I can't believe the series doesn't have one. I'm not a huge fantasy person, but I think the world building was really fun in this book, and I'd love to see a movie about Skyward. I think it would go hard. But the runner-up is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, because I remember when I was reading the book, I actually looked up, is there an adaptation? And there was supposed to be, but it never happened for some reason. Maybe it will one day. The way that M.L. Rio describes certain scenes in that book, they do Macbeth on the beach at night with fake blood, and it's so creepy but cool. And I just want to see that scene so badly. I do think Skyward would be the best adaptation, though. The next Golden Globe is for the best female character, and that goes to Spensa from Skyward. Yes, another Brandon Sanderson award. I think Spensa was just a really solid, consistent female character throughout all of her books. She had really good morals, she fought for her dreams, she was a really good underdog, and her story really made me cry sometimes. But also she was funny, she was cool, she was talented, but she had flaws. She wasn't perfect, and I hate when main characters are perfect. I think she was really heroic, and I really liked Spensa. I think she's a great female character. And my honorable mention, runner-up, is Mary Ellen from Jamaica Inn, because I thought that she was also a really good female character, and I wasn't expecting her to be. She stayed very true to the Victorian times, but also she was really cool while doing it. I don't know how to describe it without spoiling it. She just had some really cool moments and scenes, so I wanted to mention her. Next award is for Best Male Character in a Book, and that goes to Jonathan Darcy from Claudia Gray's Jane Austen series that I was talking about. Jonathan Darcy is Mr. Darcy's son, and he's neurodivergent, and I think that's really cool because I never thought I'd see a neurodivergent Jane Austen character from Regency times, and I feel like that'd be a really hard character to write, especially a male character. I think Claudia Gray hits the nail. This is coming from someone who's neurodivergent. Jonathan Darcy is just so accurate to a neurodivergent character where it's not overdone, but like you notice little things, and I didn't have any runner-ups besides like classic book characters. The next Golden Globe Award is for the best supporting character, and that goes to Dallas, or Dally Winston from The Outsiders. He's such a good character, and he's a good like brooding anti-hero character. The runner-up is Zara from Anxious People, because I thought it was interesting because she starts out as this character where you think you're not going to like her and that she doesn't really have any redeeming qualities. And Zara also has OCD, and as someone with OCD, I thought that she was a very realistic representation of a character with OCD. I think certain characters are just portrayed very stereotypically in media when it comes to OCD. Best series of the year. goes to A Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney Murder Mystery series by Claudia Gray. And I only read 2 series this year. I will admit the other series that I read was Skyward. The Mr. Darcy, Miss Tilney one stayed really true to Jane Austen's world and her characters, and I feel like it's really hard to do that because I've read other spin-offs or adaptations or like continuations of Jane Austen's work, and I feel like it doesn't stay true. It gets too steamy, which isn't like Jane Austen's work at all, or like the characters don't stay true to how they actually were, which bothers me, but I felt like she kept all the characters in character. The continuation was natural, it was well written, and it just fits so well. The best recommendation that I received this year was Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, which was given to me by my pen pal. But some honorable mentions, because my pen pal gave me a lot of great recommendations. She also recommended Picnic at Hanging Rock, which I haven't talked about that much in this video, but it was a really good book. And also, one of my friends recommended The Haunting of Hill House at the beginning of the year, and that was another really good book. But Jamaica Inn was the best because it was just so underrated, and I was not expecting it to blow me away like it did. The next Golden Globe is Genre of the Year. I split it up into about 8, 9 different genres that I read this year, and I calculated which genre did I read the most. I always tell people my favorite genres are classic and mystery. So let's see what it actually was. My genre of the year was classic. I read 11 classic books of the 26, 11 of them were classics. But surprisingly, my number 2 was historical fiction with 8 books, which I was not expecting, but I guess I really like historical fiction. And my number 3 was tied with mystery and sci-fi. And now for the last award, the last Golden Globe, if you will, my book of the year, my favorite book of 2024. This was a hard one because genuinely, I loved all the books I read. They moved me in some way. The characters, the plots, the themes. I read so many, from classics to mysteries to romances, sci-fi, fantasy, historical fiction, comedy, drama. I read so much. And it was hard to choose a favorite book. I really thought about this for a while, but I thought, which one do I just keep thinking about? Which one keeps coming back to my brain? And I just can't let it go. And that book is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. I think it's incredible that more people don't talk about this book. Shout out to my pen pal who recommended Jamaica Inn, my book of the year. I enjoyed it even though I had 2 ear infections while reading it. Thank you for watching all of the books I read in 2024. I hope you like the ambiance, the little fun twist I tried to give. Bye, Happy New Year and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and I love you all.